Okay, welcome back. It is 5:45. We're on agenda item G5. And my dogs have made an appearance. So we're going to go to the next report, which is the Groundfish Management Team. Mel?
Yes, I'm here. And if I weren't wearing my headphones, my dogs would have made an appearance after yours. So with that, good evening, council members. I am Mel Mandrup. I am part of the Groundfish Management Team and will be reading the team's report on adopt final stock assessments. The members of the GMT attended the pre-assessment workshops, the stock assessments review panel, a star panel for Dover sole and Pacific Spiny Dogfish, and the June 2021 meeting of the Groundfish Subcommittee and Scientific and Statistical Committee that reviewed all of the assessments considered at this meeting. The GMT believes that all assessments have no major technical deficiencies per the terms of reference and incorporate improvements from previous iterations. The team offers the following comments on Pacific Spiny Dogfish and data moderate assessment. Historical discards of Pacific Spiny Dogfish. Historical discards for stocks with higher encounter rates but low retention rates, such as Pacific Spiny Dogfish and Big Skate, are difficult to estimate. Annual discards of these stocks may not correlate with their annual landings. Discard practices may remain largely unknown prior to the establishment of the WICA program in 2002. The authors of the Pacific Spiny Dogfish assessment used the Groundfish Expanded Multi-Year Mortality Report, aka the GEM data product, to calculate a linear relationship between the annual total catch of the Pacific Spiny Dogfish and that of sablefish. This ratio was then applied to historical landings of sablefish to estimate total catch of Pacific Spiny Dogfish. During the STAR panel and the SSC-GFSC meetings, concerns were raised regarding this assumed relationship and the predictive power of sablefish catch on spiny dogfish catch, particularly given seasonal differences in hull level co-occurrence rates. STAR panel participants recommended that historical discards should be re-evaluated for the next assessment. Members of the GMT are willing to assist in the development of the alternate methodology as appropriate. Data moderate catch and length assessments. Data moderate assessment methods prioritize the use of limited resources, such as aging and assessors, in order to assess stocks that may not have enough data to support a full assessment or to analyze stock trajectories between full assessments. The GMT agrees that the SSC should review how best to assess nearshore species, particularly those largely harvested by recreational fisheries involving strong spatial management and or typically see higher effort shoreward of the Rockfish conservation area. Assessments of stocks with potentially strong spatial variation could be better informed with data representative of all spatial areas. The GMT encourages further discussion about the application of best scientific information available to management. The council may benefit in organizing an interdisciplinary look, including advice from the SSC on how to crosswalk the modeling of stocks in a stock assessment and how the council describes a stock for policy and management recommendations. The GMT notes that reviews conducted through the SSC-GFSC do not provide explicit roles for the members of other advisory bodies to participate in, unlike the STAR panel review process for the full assessments. In future data moderate reviews, if future data moderate reviews are conducted through the SSC-GFSC, the GMT recommends creating avenues for advisory body participation. Members of the GMT anticipate participating in the post-assessment process review later this year to further discuss the above recommendation. With that, I conclude and we'll take any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Mel. Are there any questions of Mel on the team report? Marcy Remco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mel. Bottom of page 1, your advice that the council may benefit in organizing an interdisciplinary look, including advice from the SSC on how to crosswalk the modeling of stocks in a stock assessment and how the council describes a stock for policy and management. Are you talking about how when we get a stock assessment, for example, that is for a defined area, but yet that does not align with management? So, for example, if we had a California assessment that's statewide, how we would use that in management, acknowledging our normal management break at the 40-10 line. Is that what you're recommending here?
Yes, and to pretty much go back to the Q&A session with John Budrick on defining stock boundaries and such. So just a clear definition, perhaps, on stocks. What is a stock? How is it defined? And how a stock in an assessment may or may not be the same as in a management area.
Great, thanks.
Any further questions of the team? Thank you very much, Mel.
Thank you.
The Gap, Gary Richter. Welcome, Gary.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. I'll be reading from agenda item G5A, Supplemental Gap Report 1, Groundfish Advisory Subpanel Report on Adoption of Stock Assessments. Mr. John DeVore, Pacific Fishery Management Council staff, briefed the Groundfish Advisory Subpanel on the adoption of stock assessments to be used to inform management in 2023 and beyond. The GAP offers the following comments and recommendations on stock assessment adoption. Under full assessments for Dover Sole was last assessed in 2011, was at the end of its 10-year projections. The new benchmark assessment estimates the stock is in good livelihoods. The GAP reflects the additional analyses similar to that detailed by the SSC in their G5 report, which reads as follows: an analysis of the seasonality of bycatch rates of spiny dogfish from Whitcup and other available data sources, for example, A. Shop and Pickett et al. Bycatch study, should be conducted to evaluate whether the data indicate a strong seasonal availability of spiny dogfish as bycatch to fisheries. This could be done by using month as a factor in a general linear model of bycatch rates, where there would have to be some consideration of the appropriate targeting fishing strategies to include and how to account for spatial patterns. The idea would be to use this information to develop a weekly informative upper bound prior for catchability based on the ratio of bycatch rates during the months which the survey takes place to the months in which spiny dogfish are likely to be more abundant, but no survey effort is conducted, such as the late fall and winter months. Ideally, this would include both a spatial and a temporal component. For example, it might be instructive to conduct a vast analysis of bycatch rates in the winter relative to the summer to better understand seasonal availability or shifts in the centroid of abundance, such as, for example, mean latitude of catch. Alternatively, this analysis could be conducted by state or region, as a strong southward shift in distribution could result in only modest changes in relative abundance off of Washington state, but a greater increase in bycatch rates off of Oregon and or Northern California. The results of this work could be used to develop a weekly informative prior for Q, representing an upper bounds of plausible Q values, to better inform the model for a comparable example of a weekly informed boundary prior, see G et al. In 2006. The SSC provides a succinct rationale for conducting these additional analyses, noting the spatial patterns suggested in the WCBTS indicate that the greatest abundance of spiny dogfish is found off Washington during the summer, but fishery catch and bycatch rates may be significantly greater during the winter, particularly in other areas of the coast as a result of seasonal distribution behavior. This pattern is suggested by landings data, but would be more appropriately evaluated from catch rates from bycatch data. These additional analyses are critical to inform management of spiny dogfish. The major axis of uncertainty in the current assessment is the WCBTS Q, which was fixed at 0.586 in the base model, meaning the model assumes the survey covers 58.6% of the dogfish population. This parameter is highly influential on the scale and depletion in the assessment. Again, as stated by the SSC, the uncertainty in Q is problematic since it affects the estimates of key parameters, including natural mortality and growth, creating tension in the model between these variables. There is a trade-off between M and Q, and the model fit improved when M was lower and Q was higher. Finally, the SSC noted several considerations that provide an indication that a Q value lower than 0.586 may be more realistic. Number one, the seasonal migrations of up to 600 kilometers during the summer relative to the timing of CBTS that operated from April through October, it likely affects availability. Number two, potential net avoidance given strong swimming abilities. Number three, the distribution of a portion of the stock shoreward of the WCBTS area. And number four, availability to the net itself, given their semi-pelagic habits. To reduce uncertainty associated with many of the above components, it is likely that directed research studies to collect necessary data would be needed in collaboration with the Canadian government on transboundary fishery independent and dependent data collection. However, the SSC's recommended analysis aimed at evaluating the first point, seasonal available of dogfish, relies on existing data that could be brought for the Mop-Up star panel. In addition to our concerns about the WCBTS Q value and need for further analysis of this parameter, the gap is also alarmed by the radical change in life history parameters estimated by the current model, specifically steepness. As stated by the SSC, the estimate of steepness for spiny dogfish is among the lowest value for any marine organism, which suggests an SPR of 90% should be used rather than the current SPR of 50% harvest policy. And the SSC concludes the SPR proxy is significantly higher than the SPR estimated to correspond to MSY, and the stock is predicted to collapse if it is fished at an SPR of 50%. In contrast, the gap stresses that under the current harvest policy, the spiny dogfish stock has remained relatively stable over the past 20 years. You can see that in the stock assessment figure ES4, and is further projected to remain stable as shown in the decision table under ES7. The current harvest control rule adequately reduces the fishing mortality rate, which is further reduced by a large buffer applied under a P-star value of 0.4, sustaining the population. If the current assessment were to be used to manage Pacific Coast fisheries in 2023 and 2024, without changing the current harvest policy, annual catch limits would be 1,001 metric tons and 970 metric tons in 2023 and 2024, respectively. These ACLs are significantly lower than the 2021 ACL of 1,621 tons and will constrain council-managed fisheries, which have recently caught 1,908 metric tons and 1,610 metric tons in 2018 and 2019, respectively. For example, if current off-the-top deduction for spiny dogfish are representative of 2023 and 2024 values, the approximately 1,000 metric ton ACLs would be reduced by 340 metric tons, leaving about 660 metric tons to manage groundfish trawl, fixed gear, and recreational fisheries. It is clear the council, NIMS, and fishing industry would face a major management problem. Moreover, if the vastly lower productivity life history characteristics estimated in the model were used to change the harvest control rule for council-managed fisheries, ACLs would be about 300 metric tons, seen under stock assessment table ES4. And under this scenario, every groundfish fishery on the Pacific coast, including tribal and non-tribal, would likely be constrained out of existence. It is because of the above technical deficiencies in the current assessment and the subsequent management problems that would occur if this assessment were used for management in 2023 and 2024 that lead the GAP to conclude that further work is warranted. The necessary fishery bycatch data are available and could be analyzed to potentially address some of the uncertainty in the highly influential catchability coefficient. Therefore, the GAP recommends that the Council not adopt the Spiny Dogfish stock assessment at this time and to add the stock to the Mop-Up Star Panel because additional analyses recommended by the SSC are critically needed. Next up, we have the update assessments, and that would be sablefish. This was the first update of the 2019 benchmark assessment. This 2021 update assessment confirms past estimates of good recent recruitment in the 2019 assessment, and the current depletion is estimated to be 58%. The GAP found it interesting. The update model estimates the sablefish stock has never dipped below the management target of 40% of unfished biomass, and the stock may be more productive than indicated in past assessments. GAP supports the SSC recommendation to endorse the 2021 update assessment to inform management for 2023 and beyond. And getting to the data moderate assessments using catching the length data, copper rockfish. Copper rockfish is one of the more important nearshore rockfish species economically for the non-trawl fisheries in Oregon and California. They are a major component of the nearshore rockfish catch in Southern California and are caught in both the nearshore and shelf rockfish fisheries. Landings have been increasing in the South in recent years. Reports from industry have indicated strong recent recruitment for copper rockfish. The GAP notes several areas, which include the rockfish conservation areas, cowcod conservation area, Channel Lines Marine Sanctuary, for example, contain significant areas of copper rockfish habitat. Some of these areas have been closed for more than 20 years. For California copper rockfish south of Point Conception, GAP is disappointed with the assessment estimate of current depletion at 18%, which is below the minimum stock size threshold. The GAP agrees with the SSC recommendation to do a full stock assessment as soon as possible. The GAP believes there are inconsistencies in the model data trends, suggesting recent declines in copper populations. This is inconsistent with population trends we have observed in many other stocks that have been assessed in the California Bight in recent years, such as cowcod, bocaccio, chili pepper rockfish, and even blackgill rockfish. Therefore, the GAP believes incorporation of age data and fishery-dependent indices in a full assessment is warranted given the serious fishery impacts that may ensue under a rebuilding plan. California rockfish north of Point Conception, GAP believes the Northern California copper rockfish stock should be included in a full benchmark assessment for all of California as soon as possible. Fishery-dependent indices of abundance are available for use in the full assessment that could not be used in the data moderate assessment, and that's due to terms of reference. Copper rockfish off the coast of Oregon, the GAP supports the SSC recommendation to endorse the Oregon data moderate assessment to inform management in 2023 and beyond. Copper rockfish off the coast of Washington, GAP supports the SSC recommendation to endorse the Washington data moderate assessment to inform management in 2023 and beyond. For quillback rockfish for California coastal waters, there was great uncertainty with the assumed growth and mortality parameters in the California model. There are additional data available that could inform a full assessment and were not usable in a data moderate assessment due to terms of reference. The GAP is disappointed with the assessment result for California quillback rockfish, indicating stock depletion at 14%, which is below the MSST. The GAP recommends a full assessment as soon as possible. Similar to copper rockfish, closed areas in California contain quillback rockfish habitat, and those populations are not captured in the current stock assessment. Furthermore, commercial fishermen noted roughly half the landings in the deeper nearshore consist of copper and quillback rockfish, most of which go to the live fish fishery. This appears to contrast with the assumptions made in the assessment. The GAP suggests the full assessment include catch per unit effort indices, and quillback also comprise much of the recreational sector's bag limits as well, particularly in Northern California. Quillback rockfish for Oregon coastal waters, the GAP supports the SSC recommendation to endorse the Oregon data moderate assessment to inform management in 2023 and beyond. GAP also supports the SSC recommendation that the next assessment be a full assessment. For quillback rockfish for Washington coastal waters, the GAP supports the SSC recommendation to endorse the Washington data moderate assessment to inform management in 2023 and beyond. The GAP also supports the SSC recommendation that the next assessment be a full assessment. And lastly, the square spot rockfish off California. GAP supports the SSC recommendation to endorse the California Data Moderate Assessment. This is the first time this species has been assessed. It is a species incidentally caught in California nearshore fisheries and is not often targeted due to its small size. Mr. Chairman, that completes our GAP statement. We have Dan Waldeck standing by, and I'd appreciate any questions directed towards the spiny dogfish. Go to Dan.
All right. Thanks very much for that report from the GAP. Let's see if there are any questions from the council on the GAP report. Marcy Remco.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Gary. No, my question's not about dogfish. It's for you. You recommend under copper rockfish north of Conception, you recommend the Northern California stock should be included in a full benchmark for all of California as soon as possible. Both in the case of copper and quillback, in your experience, usually when we conduct full benchmark assessments, wouldn't those be coast-wide so that we don't start doing a full on one part of a stock and then leave out another part of the stock subject to data moderate? If you can talk about your recommendation and your experiences here, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Marcy. Yeah, historically, most star panels I've been a part of and stuff, we tended to do more broad statewide or coastwide assessment. But, you recall the China rockfish thing where we broke it out into several different areas. Black rockfish, we did several different areas and stuff. This California copper thing, we just think should be done as one assessment. The break point at Point Conception, the biological break point there seem to be a lot of questions there. If it truly is a separate stock south and north of Conception. I heard Dr. Budrick talking about that a bit in the SSC statement too. And I just don't know if there's any kind of a biological break there. Especially when you think about Channel Islands, Northern Channel Islands, Point Conception area where they fish or just below the MPA there and stuff. Can't be a heck of a lot different than north of Conception because it's a lot cooler water up there. I got some weird currents and stuff there. So that's kind of our recommendation, to do one assessment for both south and north. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's as good as I can do.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you can, so it sounds like your recommendation is to proceed with copper California full, but yet your suggestion for quillback is off California. A full as soon as possible.
Yes.
So just for California?
Yes, and I knew somebody was going to ask this question. We kind of talked about it a little bit in the GAP. We didn't really have all of our representatives from Oregon and Washington there, but the folks we did have there did support, I will tell you that they did support a full assessment also for the next go around. But we didn't have everybody that, we probably needed there to make that decision.
I see. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Any further questions of the GAP? Louis Zinn, followed by Bob Dooley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Incredible, wonderful report that both of you did, you and Dan, and very informative. However, I need some more meat on the square spot situation. We can laugh,
Yeah.
because we're good friends. But anyway, on the square spot situation, I'm trying to figure out what fleets actually involved in square spot. I believe it said that the commercial fleet is not involved in it at all. So that leaves the recreational fleets. And I'm having a hard time thinking about what recreational fleet is catches a lot of square spot or discards a lot of square spot. That's a catch. And also whether it's a transboundary stock and whether the stock actually continues well down into Baja California, seeing that we've already determined that it's very uncommon north of Conception. Can you illuminate us on some of those two questions?
Sure, Mr. Chair and Louis. We actually talked about this quite a bit, and to our surprise, our Southern California charter boat representative called somebody, and they actually fish for these things. The exact terminology is where they're quite popular. I've never heard of anybody fishing for them. I've never seen anybody fishing for them. Commercial guys, there are very few commercial guys that fish for them. If you got a couple buyers that just want a couple of little bitty fish or something like that, but it's not a target fishery. And yes, these things do extend well into Mexico. We've caught them outside Ensenada, and it's definitely another one of those transboundary south stocks that I don't know how you deal with. But as far as the target species, Louis, like you say, I don't know. I was shocked what I heard the other day because I didn't know of any sport fishing people that fish for them. And I know there's very little activity from the commercial side of it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, yes, it does. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Louis.
Thanks, Louis, for the question. Gary for the answer. Bob Dooley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm probably going to be lacking in a definitive question here, but I am just totally impressed by the depth and the detail in the GAP report, and I just wanted to compliment the breadth of talent and historical perspective that committee brings to us. It's just it's amazing. They fill in a lot of gaps that we don't get without on the water experience, and it really fills out the picture. And I just wanted to express my gratitude for their good work.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Bob, thank you very much for that. But I'm not smart enough for most of this stuff. But Dan Waldeck did a fantastic job on the spiny dogfish, and we've got Susan in there cutting and pasting and fixing stuff for us along the way, and just a lot of great input from the rest of the GAP. And we got a good group of people in there, as folks probably know by now. So thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Gary.
All right. Was there a further question from anyone? All right, Gary, thanks very much.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Have a good evening.
You too. Now, I think we're going to break here and start with public comment in the morning, but I wanted, if there are anyone who has signed up for public comment who will not be available in the morning, raise your hand and we'll get you in right now. Otherwise, we'll start with public comment first thing in the morning. Dan Waldeck,
Yeah, if I may, I have a kid with an orthodontist appointment in the morning, and it would be, if begging your indulgence, it would be better, I think, for both of us if I know I have this off my plate and can focus on that thing in the morning, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. So why don't you go ahead, Dan? And,
thank you.
Then we'll go home. You're already there.
Okay, so I am Dan Waldeck, Executive Director of the Pacific Whiting Conservation Cooperative, and thank you, Chair Gorelnik, for this opportunity to address the Council today. The PWC supports the GAP recommendation to send the spiny dogfish stock assessment to the Mop-Up Star Panel for further review. We think the GAP provides a strong rationale for why this action is warranted. Moreover, the GAP report highlights specific issues identified by the SSC that need further analysis and a narrow analytical request to address how West Coast Bottom Trawl Survey catchability, that is Q, is dealt with in the assessment model. It is highly likely that the current model is missing key spatial and temporal dynamics in dogfish migration during October, November, and December. For example, a cursory review of at-sea hake fishery data shows an order of magnitude difference in bycatch rates when comparing May and June to October, November, and December. In a nutshell, occurrence in the fishery is much higher after much of the survey has been completed. Understanding the effects of seasonal migration and how it relates to catchability in the West Coast Bottom Trawl Survey is critical. Given the dramatic change in population status and annual catch limits and the associated impacts on Pacific Coast groundfish fisheries, further analysis of seasonal migration and West Coast Bottom Trawl Survey Q is needed now, not in the next cycle. The Whiting Co-op stands ready to assist in the analysis in any way necessary, including providing access to sea state analysis of fishery data to help inform this important work. In summary, we strongly agree with the GAP that additional analysis is needed now and recommend the Spiny dogfish stock assessment be sent to the Mop-Up Star panel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dan, thank you very much for your comment. Let me see if there are any questions from around the table. All right, thanks very much, Dan. And hope the orthodontist appointment goes fine tomorrow.
As do I in my pocketbook.
All right, everyone. I think we've gone quite long today, and we'll try to finish public comment and finish up this agenda item tomorrow. And so we're a little behind, but hopefully not too much. Let me see if there are any announcements from Chuck Tracy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I believe Kenyon Hensel has his hand up for his public comment as well. So if you would care to indulge him, because he can't be here tomorrow. Are you hearing me?
Here I am muted. Okay, Kenyon, would you like to give your public comment now? You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yep.
Thank you. I'd like to tell you my name is Kenyon Hensel. I'm a nearshore commercial fisherman from Crescent City. I fished in these nearshore waters for roughly 45 years. I want to first off acknowledge all the work done by everyone, and I'm really appreciative of the California delegation for their support in this process, the way that they are working very hard to try to work this out so that we can all benefit, the fisheries and the people who use them. I'd also like to say that basically, I feel that you need to take your time and get this right, and that in the future, spatial management will become a part of the process in a much greater extent. You should know that right now, the way I see it, spatial management is your overall protection. When you have put away over 50% of a species habitat where it is now off limits to fishing, then I do not see how that species biomass can fall below 50% unless it's a natural occurring catastrophe. And that to me is science just like gravity. It's self-evident, and that you should be using it in your deliberations as soon as possible. And I think that is something that if you are going to get credit for all the closures and all the time we've spent off the water and unable to fish in those areas, the sacrifices we've given, that's something that I've always advocated for. And I'd like to advocate it again at this time. I believe it's a tool you could be really using right now to help the whole process forward so that we can have a good, solid assessment of these fishes and proceed with management that can be accepted and understood by everyone as being beneficial for all. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you'll have a great evening.
All right, thanks very much, Kenyon. Are there any questions of Kenyon? Marcy Remco.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kenyon, for speaking with us today. You mentioned that you are an active commercial nearshore fisherman with about 45 years of experience. I'm presuming that your concerns are specifically with the quillback assessment and also copper possibly as well, but maybe you can speak to us about your your experience with these stocks in your fishing activities and their relative abundance to other nearshore stocks.
Well, Marcy, I certainly can for the area I fish in, within the 20-mile radius of Crescent City, where I've spent my life fishing with a rod and reel. Those specific stocks you're speaking of, copper is not a real strong stock in the near shore. Now, I have fished out to 50 fathoms in the past, and just recently you have opened up to 40 fathoms, and I have gone out and fished for the mix of shelf species that we're now allowed to harvest. And I can tell you that what I have found in an area that I fished concentrated fishing in the 80s, when I was catching these fish and bringing them in up to 1,700 pounds a day, that area is full of all the species. They're bigger than what I remember them being, and they are certainly, in a sense, I would say, in better shape all the way around as far as the numbers and the sizes. I've seen all different sizes. Smaller fish tend to seem to want to be up in the flatter areas where it's a little shallower, even if you're in a deep water area where there's a lot of relief. The larger fish seem to like to be off those areas. And I can absolutely, when I drift across an area like that, I can see as I catch larger fish at first, as I move up the gradient, which is a good way to catch fish. We like to work up a gradient or down a gradient if possible in relief. And as I go up the gradient into the shallower water or where it flattens out, I begin to see some of the smaller fish. And I believe that's because the predation is hard. There's larger fish in the lower gradient, in the deeper water, and they eat the smaller fish, obviously. So the smaller fish tend to be available in that little bit shallower water. We're talking the difference between 240 and maybe 190 feet. And of course, as you come near shore, you find both copper and quailback, which they begin to diminish as you get very shallow, say maybe 10 fathoms. But when you are fishing, interestingly enough, when you are fishing off of the rocky areas, you tend to see quailback. They're not, and this may be something that has to do with what's going on with your sport fishing, but at the moment, quailback tend to be off those rocky areas in more, I'd say, muddy areas. Our fishermen, when they fish for halibut, they get off the rocks into the muddy areas and they will find quailback, and you will sometimes find some other rockfish like a copper or a brown rockfish. We have a few of those. They're in the shallow water and a little more muddy areas. They seem to share that. And you basically, the other thing I want to say about the quailback especially is they're one of the fish we can release even at the deeper depths, and we release them directly into the water and they turn and go straight down. They have a high amount of energy at the surface and they go straight back down. I don't need to pin them. I don't need to do anything special. And I believe that's a good sign of survival when you can drop a fish off a hook without touching it, and then it goes straight down into the lower depths where it recompresses, and they don't come back up to the surface again. Whereas things like yellow eye, we decompress those so that they can go down. Otherwise, they will languish on the surface and not be able to get down into the water at all because of the extra air inside them. So I certainly, now I've only really been on that shelf in that area I'm speaking of about 10 or 15 times since it's been opened the first of the year. But I certainly can see the difference in the amount of fish there. It's certainly from what I remember when I fished out there before, especially the size of the fish is much better. Anyway, I appreciate that. I hope we can keep that open and I can continue to fish there. And again, anything else you might need help with, I'd be happy to in the future. And thank you for being part of this process.
Thanks, Kenyon. Any further questions for Kenyon? All right, thank you, Kenyon.
Thank you for letting me have this tonight, and I hope you all have a great evening again.
All right, thanks for that. And I'm not seeing any other hands up from public commenters, so I'm going to conclude that The rest are available tomorrow morning. We'll start again tomorrow at 8. Chuck Tracy, aside from pointing out Kenyon, whose name I didn't see with a hand, any other announcements?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, just to mention that we pick this up tomorrow morning. We'll start with our regular agenda. We've got the harvest specifications, planning, and in-season adjustment for groundfish. So we're hoping that those will go a little quicker than we had originally planned for. So I think we'll be